Every day we see more tents under bridges, more families living out of cars. And while the problems seem insurmountable, the solutions are simpler than you think. We share the real stories and the real solutions of homelessness, what works, what doesn't, and how communities like ours can do better. I'm Baron King, and this is Give Me Shelter. All right, so welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on Give Me Shelter. I'm really excited today. As you know, I've mentioned in previous podcasts that a really important tool in the work of fighting homelessness is a 24/7 low barrier shelter. And with me today, I have a special guest, Siena Duncan from the Chattanooga Times-Free Press. Thanks for joining me.
Of course, Baron. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, great. She interviewed me about a month and a half ago. She was interviewing a wide variety of people for an article on this. This podcast is set to come out on the 21st of April, and her article hit 2 days earlier. So we're recording this before the drop of the article, but it's going to be in that Sunday edition. So if you haven't seen it, go to Times Free Press, their website, or on social media, and you can find the article. But thanks again for coming in. I'm curious, when you got this project to do this article, what are some of the things that were eye-opening to you or things that you learned along the way?
Yeah, so the founding basis for this article, the crux of the story, is our unsheltered rate in Chattanooga. It is relatively high compared to the other major cities in Tennessee, Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville. Their unsheltered rate is somewhere around 20 to 30% typically. And when I was looking at the data, ours is 60%. And I'm talking broadly in terms of Hamilton County because we don't necessarily have data specifically within Chattanooga's city limits, but Hamilton County in Southeast Tennessee, that unsheltered rate is 60%, which is double to triple other areas, other regions. And so I wanted to figure out why that was. Obviously, there are so many factors that contribute to homelessness in a certain region. But something that I found interesting was if you look at HUD data, so that the compilation of every region in Tennessee's point-in-time count, and then also their bed inventory count when it comes to all the different categories of shelter and housing that is provided to homeless people. Our, per capita rate is 3 beds for every 10 homeless people. Wow. So if you compare that to Knoxville and Nashville, their rate is more so around 7 beds for every 10 homeless people. And Memphis is actually shows a surplus, 11 beds for every 10 homeless people. So I talked to some people over at the Homeless Coalition, their data whizzes that say that there is a correlation between the amount of beds in a region and their unsheltered rate. So people who are literally just sleeping on the street, not in a shelter bed that night.
Right.
Whether that's emergency shelter or long-term housing, whatever that may be. So I found that number pretty striking, and I figured I should reach out to people working with the Chat Foundation and other homeless services organizations in the region and just get their take on it and put that information out there too.
Great. So when you have a statistic, it's really important to kind of dive in like you did and find out why, right? Would you say it's more of a function of insufficient shelter bed opportunities in Chattanooga or just a higher percentage of people per capita that are experiencing homelessness?
I think it's more so an issue of bed space because if you look at our homelessness numbers, and even in the most recent point-in-time count that came out like just a couple of weeks ago for 2026, we just raw numbers wise, have fewer homeless people than places like Nashville and Memphis, naturally, which are much larger population centers. So it's not really a matter of how many homeless people we have. And even per capita, if you look at our population as a whole in Southeast Tennessee and Hamilton County, and you compare, the percentage of people that are homeless here compared to our actual core population, it's still lower than those areas. And yet we have higher unsheltered rates and lower amounts of shelter just generally for the homeless population here. So I guess you could say when you normalize the data, it still comes out looking not too great for the homeless population here.
Yeah, and so for those of you not in Chattanooga or in Chattanooga, Chat Foundation is on 11th Street, so we're in the downtown area, and we operate a cold weather warming shelter. We have funds to operate overnight sleeping options for people that are experiencing homelessness when the temperature drops below 35 degrees. And one of the things I found is typically when it's a really cold night, like say 25 degrees, we'll have 100, 110, 120 people that will spend the overnight in our facility. But part of that is that's 100 people, but that really is only the population of really that downtown MLK core.
Right.
And what I mean is because of limited public transportation and limited mobility, we have encampments in Rossville, in East Ridge, in Hickson, Lookout Valley that do not use our shelter. So when you say 100 people overnight, that is just for the downtown area, and a lot of people choosing not to do it. So that tells me that, like you said, several hundreds of people in the whole Hamilton County area just experiencing unsheltered homelessness.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I had the opportunity to go out with the Regional Outreach Cooperative here. The
Joe
Rock.
Brackett's group. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The Rock. And that was a really eye-opening experience just to tag along in that big van that they drive around in and see the work that they do. And it is very clear that homelessness is everywhere in Chattanooga. And it also made it clear how invisible it can be.
Yeah.
A lot of these tents, like they are purposefully trying to hide so that they don't get moved and uprooted and have to figure out where they're going to go next. So they are out there trying to survive in encampments where you don't even notice them. You probably drive by one every day. So.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't kind of understand the encampment thing, why are people there? Well, you can't sleep on somebody's private property. That's trespassing. You can't sleep on public property because that's now potentially a felony in Tennessee. We have the nation's harshest public camping bill. There's no other third option.
Sure.
And a lot of the people are trying to survive on a day-to-day basis, avoiding law enforcement. Why? Because they don't want to get arrested. They don't want additional charges. They don't want their life to spiral into a deeper pit. And that makes providing services that much harder. We have outreach workers that go out and they're trying to find Joe Smith because we got good news on his apartment search, and we can't find Joe Smith because his encampment has moved.
Right.
And so we think the 24/7 low barrier shelter would allow people to be not only safe and secure and healthier, but also you could find them when you had good news or a change in status.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I talked to you a little bit about this for the story, and it's included in the story, but could you tell me a little bit about those plans for a low barrier shelter in Chattanooga in particular?
Yeah. So I came to Chattanooga 4 years ago. One of the first things I was told when I was getting up to speed in my job is, hey, Chattanooga is interested in developing a 24/7 low barrier shelter. The city's been studying it for nearly 15 years through several administrations. And so I said, sure. So I got to know some people with city government, got to look at the research that was done, got to familiarize myself with what low barrier shelters are, traveled to 4 or 5 different ones to see how they operate, how they function, why are they successful. And I feel like in my 4 years, we've gotten close a couple times. There has been interest, not only public interest, but also interest within city government to make this happen. But then it seems like talks freeze or stagnate, and then we don't talk about it for a while. And again, I think we were just very hopeful in this last calendar year that, hey, we were maybe making some traction. Chat Foundation had identified a couple different properties that could be determined for that. But I don't envy the job of our public officials. There are some people, a good amount, hundreds of people out there that really believe that this shelter needs to happen, that it can help be a vehicle to transition people from homelessness into housed. And I think that's some of the things that people don't really understand, that it's not just a building where people are going to hang out. It's a place where people can get needed rest. if you've never slept in an urban encampment, it's not peaceful. It's difficult to sleep. Most people will tell me that they sleep with one eye open to fend off people stealing their stuff or assaulting them. And so they don't get a good night's sleep. They do have their things that they're worried about being stolen. And then they wake up and the public at large says something like, why don't you just get a job? And it's like, well, if I had to stay up all night just to protect my things, I don't think I'd be my best version of myself going to work.
Sure.
So the shelter provides that. And once people have a week or two of stability, good sleep, they begin taking next steps. And what are next steps? Maybe it's to finally rewrite that resume and start doing some job interviewing. Maybe it's to take care of some health-related issues that are keeping them from being able to go to work. Maybe it's reaching out to friends and family members that can actually provide assistance. And so this vehicle really allows people to take really necessary steps in stabilizing themselves and next steps in furthering themselves towards self-sufficiency. And so, some of the questions that have come up is it better to have one big shelter or several satellite shelters? And I think there's pros and cons to both of those. Mm-hmm. But I believe the city needs to at least start with something in an area where there's a high concentration of people experiencing homelessness, whether if that's East Ridge, the downtown area, Hickson, wherever it may be.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's mostly what I've heard from the homeless services providers like you in the area. And the primary sentiment that I've heard is that housing has to come first, whether that's a bed to sleep in for the night in a shelter that you're able to claim and be there for as long as you need, or whether that's an actual apartment where you're getting a subsidy or assistance with rent to get back on your feet. Generally, that's what people are telling me, that in order to exit homelessness, you need a place to stay first. Yeah. And it's also my sense, too, at least what I've heard from these service providers, that there are a lot of opportunities to get a lot of other services in Chattanooga, whether that's, clothing, food, showers. They're trying to open up all of those doors, but you can have all of those things and still be in a really, really rough spot because you don't have a place to stay.
Absolutely. And the cities that have used a 24/7 low barrier shelter, it's kind of like a two-pronged approach. There's the shelter itself, but then there's the need for robust support services. So that's case managers, housing navigators, people that can help with getting a photo ID or something really basic like that. And when I've visited different shelters, what's interesting is most communities have to build everything from the ground up. So you go to Colorado Springs, and it's a fabulous complex, but they have their own dining commons. They have an animal kennel for companion animals. They have all the case managers, the housing navigators, social services, VA. Everything is in this complex. And you start adding all those things, the price tag of creating such a structure gets really expensive. What's unique in Chattanooga is on 11th Street, you have the Chat Foundation, which is a city block long. We are the only comprehensive service provider in southeastern Tennessee, meaning we provide over 30 services. And right across the street is homeless health care, providing health services that we as Chat Foundation can't provide. So right there, you have those supportive services. What we're missing is the structure. We're missing the shelter. And that's why I think Chattanooga has this unique opportunity to be able to put this in motion at a fraction of the cost of what it would cost other cities to build everything up from scratch.
Yeah. Actually, when I was talking to the person who helps run the joint office of, I think it's a joint office of homelessness or housing or something in Knoxville.
Yes.
They were telling me that they're actually being mentored by the Homeless Coalition here in Chattanooga on how to do that case management services stuff, because they are trying to build out a better system of intake and getting people where they need to go, which I thought was so interesting because in Knoxville they do have more options for shelter, but they're trying to build out that services aspect of it. So, yeah.
So everybody's in a different place with what they have in place. Yeah, so we have some good things in place in Chattanooga, and I've always believed that. We just need a place for people to spend the night.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things that's also difficult, and I think we really need to this shelter for this reason, is there's been an apparent change in how homelessness is enforced. We've had people that were working in the city with rock that are now helping with encampment closures. And so I know our community is feeling a lot of pressure from Chattanooga Police Department and from the city to just not be visible, not be there. And I think a shelter could change that, because I understand how homelessness impacts tourism, and that's a concern for business owners and the city. But creating a place where people could be legally would make a big difference.
Sure.
And the criminal justice system is just not set up to solve homelessness. It's just not. The people that are going to be arrested on some of these charges are going to be released and back in the same situation.
Could you tell me about those shifts that you've been seeing? Like, what exactly is changing?
So I have a lot of colleagues throughout the state that say that their local law enforcement is using the new felony public camping charge. So for those of you that don't follow this very closely, most communities have misdemeanor public camping. So if you put up a tent on Miller Park and try and sleep overnight and you refuse to leave, you'll be charged with public camping. But 2 years ago, the state legislature passed a bill that allows local governments to charge people with felony charges for that same offense. And that makes it a big deal, because if you are fortunate enough to have a voucher, you could lose that voucher. If you have a felony charge, if you're trying to gain employment, a felony charge makes it that much harder. If you're lucky enough to have an apartment, you do a background check, you might not get that apartment. So it's another obstacle for people trying to exit homelessness, having this happen. And so 3 weeks ago, on a Saturday, we had 6 cruisers and 13 officers start threatening people waiting in our lunch line with felony camping. And they're just lined up on the sidewalk waiting to come into our dining hall for a meal. That's different. We haven't seen that. It felt like an escalation. Just the fact that they were using the threat of a felony is something that we hadn't seen in the last 2 years, while other parts of Tennessee is actively using that. And then just a much more aggressive approach to closing encampments. Again, I get it. No one wants to have encampments, but if you want to close an encampment and you don't have an option, it's kind of like playing that game whack-a-mole. You hit the one mole and another one pops up, and it just continues. And so it's hard to understand encampment enforcement when we don't have a solution of where people can go.
Sure. Yeah. I think that was discussed a little bit in the first homelessness work group meeting that the city hosted, I think in early March. Several city staffers were up there alongside Chattanooga City Council members, and it was shortly after they did the encampment clearing behind Harbor Freight.
Yeah.
And that came up, obviously, for discussion during that meeting. And I think it was Kevin Roy who said something like, yes, we are essentially moving people down the road because we have this issue of a lack of shelter, which I thought was pretty poignant in the moment.
Yeah. I actually think a 24/7 low barrier shelter allows law enforcement to do their job in a more humane way. And what I mean is, I've spoken with a number of officers that when they find an individual, maybe they receive a phone call from a homeowner that says, hey, somebody's living between my house and another house and they can't be there. CPD comes and says, hey, you have to move. Right now, there's no option of, well, where should I go? And so the option is just pick up your stuff and shuffle down the sidewalk, and that person will probably find another place to burrow in, or face arrest and then go to Silverdale for a few days or a few weeks or months. A 24/7 low barrier shelter would give law enforcement the option to say, hey, I can take you to the shelter and there won't be any problem, but you can't stay here. But we don't have that option. And so I think it becomes very frustrating for people experiencing homelessness to say, hey, you got to keep moving. You can't put that backpack down. You can't lay your head down.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was really interesting looking at the options for shelter because, again, regions are up until 2024. The federal government has not released listings for 2025, unfortunately. But up until 2024, regions were reporting bed counts for these places that provide shelter and what kind of shelter it was and whether it was year-round or just, overflow. And really the only place you can go in Chattanooga if you are a single man or woman is the Chattanooga Rescue Mission off of Main Street. And even there, they have something like a little under 90 beds total, and I think 20 or 30 of those are for women. So even fewer options really for women. And they were also telling me too that they don't necessarily reserve spots, but they do try to prioritize people that are coming back day after day. So I asked, what does that mean for how many actually open spots you have on a given evening, and really it amounts to like 20 or 30 beds that they actually have open if you are suddenly homeless and need someplace to go, which is that is our primary place. Like that is the only place to go. And given that we have anywhere from 700 to 1,000 homeless people in Hamilton County alone, that seems pretty significant to me, which is why I wrote about it. I wanted to ask also, and we talked about this a little bit in our previous interview, but why do you think it's been 15 years since that original study that we need a low barrier shelter? Why has it taken over a decade's worth of planning and time to come up with something?
I think, and this is something I learned being a psychologist, I think there's some things that people like the idea of more than the reality of. And what I mean is I think the idea of creating such a structure to safeguard our vulnerable population, that's very positive. But not everybody has the same view of homelessness. And I think there's some competing interests. I've heard that members of the downtown business community would prefer a structure that is 3 or 4 miles east of the downtown, that it would hopefully remove panhandlers and homeless individuals from the tourism district, the business district. And I get it. You kind of want a great environment for people that are coming in to visit Chattanooga and spend money. The problem is that these shelters are not like the Field of Dreams. It's not build it and they will come. You have to build it where people are. That just because people don't have a roof doesn't mean they don't have a community. They have to have access to employment. They have to have access to transportation. They have to have access to health care and services. And those services don't exist on Lee Highway or other places in Chattanooga. And so I think there's been pushback from that. From what I've learned from people that have been living here for a long time is that an administration studies low barrier shelters and whether it's appropriate for Chattanooga and gets really close, and then their term expires. And then a new administration comes in and says, yeah, we really ought to study this and see if it's viable. And so from what I've understood, there's been 3 different administrations doing 3 different studies. And what I was encouraged with when I got to Chattanooga was somebody told me, and I didn't hear this with my own ears, but that Mayor Kelly said that we don't need to study this anymore. And I would agree with that. I think we have enough data, both internal data from Hamilton County and Tennessee, but then also external data from cities that are doing this well. That we don't need more data. We don't need to study it anymore. We just need to do it. But I would imagine that there's pushback, and it's probably not the easiest thing to push through. But I also believe that sometimes doing important things means doing hard work and taking a stand. And obviously, I feel passionate about this, and so I have a very strong opinion that we need this shelter. But not everybody spends 365 days a year thinking about these needs. And so I recognize that I'm very pro-shelter. So I love that you went out on outreach. I think if everybody could do that, it would really profoundly change the way they experience or understand homelessness. I'm wondering about the people that are in remote encampments. Did you get to talk to them at all about the idea of a shelter that would have capacity and that would be ADA compliant and really accessible?
Yeah, I actually was. I was out there before they cleared the encampment at Harbor Freight, so I was able to talk to the residents of that encampment, and they had been there for quite some time. And I was able to talk to a woman who was kind of the de facto leader of the encampment.
Okay.
She was one of the first people there, her and her fiance. And something that I found really interesting was when I asked her, "Have you ever tried to seek shelter?" She said no, because all of the shelter options here would have separated me and my fiance, and that it was a serious safety concern for her, to say the least. And that also has contributed to their struggle when it comes to getting back on their feet, when it comes to finding jobs, because they're scared to leave one another alone with their things. Just like you said, people have to sleep with one eye open because there's always the threat that their things will get taken or stolen. Yeah. Another instance that was really interesting, I met a homeless woman that lives more so in the downtown area.
Okay.
And she has access to a phone. She has her own phone and usually hangs out at the library where there's Wi-Fi. And what she does to try and make money is she does this game testing app that I don't know if you've seen this circulated around. It's kind of as like a side hustle where you can basically test mobile games and run through the whole game, and then you'll get a payout.
Okay.
But these apps definitely take quite some time to like even make just $10. And at the Chattanooga Rescue Mission, and this was confirmed by the people that I spoke with, there's a rule that you are not supposed to be on your phone. You can't use your phone while you're in the shelter. And so for her, you know, her phone is her lifeline, and sometimes she gets her phone charger stolen. Sometimes she gets her jacket stolen. Sometimes she just needs money on hand to buy water for the day, that sort of thing. So she needs to constantly be making that small amount of money every day. And so for her, that shelter just doesn't work for her. There was also a pretty interesting example when it comes to this idea of a low barrier shelter where you can bring pets. I was at one of those shower up stations on Rossville Boulevard where Shower Up comes in, and they also bring in pro bono vet services and everything to kind of create a little hub just for the day in like the parking lot of a Dollar General. And I went out there and spoke to a man with his dog who has been homeless for maybe a year and a half or so. And he was saying that he lives in a tent and has 2 sleeping bags, one for him and one for his dog. And he would never seek shelter here because none of the shelters accept pets. And he does not want to leave his dog alone. He's had the dog for many, many years before he became homeless. So that's a really important part of his life.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. One of the things I was stunned when I went to Colorado Springs, one of the things I toured was their animal shelter, which is a little kennel that's off to the side of their shelter. Pet owners are responsible for caring for the animals, feeding them, getting them exercise, but they're in a separate section, so it safeguards the people sleeping in the section with the animals. And everybody's told me, Barron, if you're involved in developing a shelter, it's got to have a kennel because people won't leave their animals. And I get it. And maybe if you're listening to this, you're wondering, wow, you're homeless and you have a pet, that's low priority. But you know what? People have animals for companionship, for protection. And I'm not going to judge them for whether or not they have an animal. The reality is they care and love these pets, and they won't leave them. So any shelter that we create has to have some type of animal kenneling solution. And you mentioned the vet services, Dandelion Kind, that goes out with Rock. They've already contacted me saying, we will help you design it. So we're really hopeful. And I'm always an optimist, but with this topic and the 15-year history of not getting this done, my optimism sometimes wanes a bit. But if you're listening here and you're in Hamilton County and this is a topic that resonates with you, what can you do? I'm a believer that, if we stay silent, people may not realize how important this is, but there is a way that you can make your feelings known. So reach out to city council members, reach out to the city and county government, and let them know that, people are suffering outside. That for some people, in the hot months and the cold months, it's a life and death issue. And so if you'd like more information on how to get involved and help make this happen, you can reach out to us at info@chatfoundation.org. We would love to have you join the fight. And Siena, I love that you did this article. I hope everybody reads it. And your contact information, we've already got that on the screen. So if they want to reach out to you and ask you some questions. But thank you so much for your time and coming in here and talking about this.
Yeah, of course. Always available to talk about the journalism we're doing. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Give Me Shelter. If you made it this far in the episode, I invite you to share it with at least one person today, because change happens one conversation at a time. I'm Baron King. We'll see you next time.